So now we're on to item 16, erosion and sediment controls. Clive here?
Yes,
Yes, here he is.
That was a presentation. That was a presentation.
So kia ora, I'm Clive Appleton. I'm the Healthy Waterways Program Lead. I would like you to know that I've got a PhD in ecology. I have been interested in waterways and passionate about them since probably the age of 16, 40 years ago. And my spouse can vouch that this matter before you today has kept me awake for many times. It's a very complex situation, and I totally understand Mike Patchett's frustration and wanting to achieve something positive in this space. Today I'm going to give you a presentation about the 14 years that I've spent in council dealing with this area of work around erosion and sediment control. I have Nathan Dougherty, who's a team leader at ECAN, who I work closely with on a frequent basis around consent matters. We have Brent Pizzi, the RMA lawyer, who's here to hear what's going to be debated because he has the experience around the consent. I also have Buster from Building Consent and Inspections, who I've been working with closely in his team to be able to field any further questions that I may not be able to. To start off, I'll state the obvious. Since the Earth was formed, we've had erosion and sediment loss. The big situation that we're facing today is the fact that a lot of the Port Hills are exposed and do not have adequate vegetation cover to stop the loess from coming off, even in minor storm events. We also have the situation of a lot of earthworks. A lot of subdivisions, disturbed soil results in erosion and sediment loss. The Port Hills rural land is our responsibility as a council to deal with surface water on that matter, but it's actually outside the remits of our stormwater discharge consent, and I'll explain that shortly. I want to highlight the fact that we have constructed the Cashmere Valley and Eastman basins to capture sediment and to prevent downriver flooding. We have put funding towards ECAN as well for the roadside cuttings trial that was undertaken in the Adventure Park to look at different vegetative covers to stop or try and cut down sediment loss on roadside cuttings, especially around the Littleton Harbour area. We have an opportunity to upscale the $9 million LTP program to look at Port Hills erosion remediation. In that program, we're looking at planting gullies that are high source of sediment loss, remediating hillside outfalls that are legacy issues where stormwater pipes just stick out over the side of the hill. Look at reinforcing watercourses, namely the stream that runs through the Adventure Park complex down at the bottom by the car park. This is a massive issue. It's more than what council can deal with. And I think there's an opportunity to look at the entire Port Hills area holistically with partners. And when I mean partners, it's central government, the likes of DOC, our partners in ECAN, it's iwi, it's community groups, it's landowners that need to come together to look at the holistic approach to improving the environment of the Port Hills from a biodiversity, forest regeneration and carbon sequestration approach, and reducing erosion and sediment loss as a result of doing those activities. The stormwater discharge consent covers where we have a stormwater network across the city and also the 23 settlements on Banks Peninsula. This is a 25-year consent and council are responsible for stormwater discharges and reducing contaminants entering into the waterway receiving environment. Council has constructed stormwater basins and wetlands across the city in greenfield and brownfield developments for capturing sediment and other contaminants. And a lot of those basins are very successful at capturing somewhere between 70 and 80% of the heavy sediment. I also want to note that housing intensification in the older part of the city is a challenge, for there is currently limited options for stormwater treatment. If you look at this map, which has been recently updated, I can give you a bigger version if you're interested later. You will see in the dark blue where we have built stormwater treatment facilities, basins and artificial wetlands in those new areas around Horswell, Knightsbridge. You can see to the north near Lake Katu, I think it is, and the Groins. If you look to the right of that, you can see mauve and blue stormwater treatment facilities situated there. The mauve ones are to be built, the blue ones have been completed to date. And as you can see, the older part of the city, we don't have those facilities as yet. I want to point out that subdivisions where there's earthworks of greater than 1 hectare in size on the hills and greater than 5 hectares on flatland are excluded from our stormwater discharge consent. This picture was taken after a major storm event in the Cashmere Valley. You can see the Cashmere Pond is full of sediment received from the Adventure Park Valley. You can see the Cashmere Valley subdivision here. It looks a mess. This subdivision is excluded out of our stormwater consent. They have a stormwater construction phase discharge consent with ECAN. In my personal opinion, given that we have highly erodible hillsides, I'm hoping that national legislation looks carefully at what we are enabled to build on those hills, because it is very difficult to control sediment during major storm events that overwhelm stormwater infrastructure. The consent requires us to put together a sediment discharge management plan, which has recently been certified by ECAN. In a nutshell, it requires building consents and resource consents to have erosion sediment control plans submitted. Our engineers vet those plans, and if they're not up to scratch, they'll ask amendments before they'll accept them and approve those consents to proceed. We have set that for high risk erosion sites, we require inspections of erosion sediment control measures to be in place and to be inspected before earthworks commence. Building inspectors are required to monitor and enforce erosion sediment control compliance, especially with tracking of sediment off-site and discharges during rain events. That's important to note. Tracking of sediment off-site is not something that we want. We also have a meteorological service, and we receive alerts for when major rain events are forecasted to enable our inspectors and subdivision engineers to be able to work with industry to warn them that there are major storm events coming, and that they need to ensure that their erosion sediment control measures are in place. It's one thing to develop a plan. It's another thing to make sure that it's actually being undertaken. So, a couple of staff within the quality assurance team undertook a sediment survey of residential building sites to see the level of erosion sediment control compliance. They took 50 sites across the city from September through to February and tracked them from the very start of construction, earthworks, right through to the roof being on and in the walls, etc. Many sites have poorly installed erosion sediment control measures or failed to maintain them. It's crazy that building companies put these control measures. The cost, of course, is borne by the person who buys the building, but it's important to maintain these properly. You can see on the right the failed entryway. The stone there should be on a geotextile mat, and there shouldn't be sediment sitting outside in the gutter. The other one is self-explanatory. There's no sediment sock around it to protect it. There's no witch's hat in it to stop the catch of the sediment. You've got a van standing on top of a sediment sock. The last one is actually builder's brick cement that's been traipsed out onto the road. It'll be caustic for a start. So when that goes down the drainage system, it will be changing the pH of the water. There's no excuse for lack of maintenance of these control measures. So we're now going to work with the inspectors to determine the best ways to work with building practitioners to significantly improve erosion sediment control compliance. That is not a throwaway comment. I take that seriously. The legal framework around the consent. ECAN is the regulator of the consent and has RMA powers. We work closely with ECAN counterparts. We meet on a monthly basis to deal with issues that we're facing within the consent. They undertake a monitoring review, compliance review of the of the consent on a 6-monthly basis, and identify where we're non-compliant. We are the consent holder, but we do not actually have RMA powers to deal with sediment discharges that get into our stormwater network. If council excluded individual construction sites or all construction sites, then ECAN could take action on sediment discharges. Under those circumstances, building companies would need to apply for construction phase stormwater discharge consents with ECAN. ECAN would need a full team to deal with that, a new team. National legislative changes that are happening right now. We all know that the RMA is to be replaced by the Natural and Built Environment Act and a couple of other acts as well. Consent ownership is set at this stage to move to the water entity in July 2024. The water entity will want to amend the consent, especially around sediment discharge management plan, because of the relationship with our building inspectors. The Water Services legislation bill that is currently out is proposing water entities to have significant enforcement powers and to actually have compliance and monitoring teams just like ECAN. And here's an example of the proposed compliance enforcement offences, convictions and fines that are proposed around in the stormwater system. So if the entity gets this, then it'll be serious for developers and for building companies to actually comply. So in conclusion, I think given all that is happening at this stage, it's premature to undertake an external audit of the consent, and in fact it's ECAN's decision as to whether to do that or not. When I talk about that ECAN, when I referred in my council report to ECAN not agreeing to this either, it's because of the discussions I've had with my counterparts in ECAN. I think we need to continue working with ECAN, as we already are, and building inspectors, to educate and work with building practitioners to significantly improve erosion sediment control compliance. We can do it. I recommend that Council considers working with partners to develop a Port Hills plan focused on reducing erosion and sediment loss. As I say, it's a multi-pronged approach with many partners to make that happen. Thank you.
That was a fantastic presentation. You really know your stuff. It's excellent.
Thank you.
Well done. Melanie.
That very last bullet point is not in a paper today, did you think as a staff member you'd recommend adding that in, or that we could do that?
You could do that. That is my personal opinion. I have aired that with the zone, one or two of the zone committee facilitators, that we should take a holistic approach to looking at the Port Hills. And I've spoken to a number of staff across council on this as well. It's just an idea, but I think if we have the collective partners right from word go in a room looking at the wide issues for the Port Hills, then erosion sediment loss will be something that will be much more easily dealt with than in isolation.
Mm-hmm. Could we get some staff advice on whether that could become part of the
Tyler, then Yanni.
Kia ora. I really appreciate that kōrero. That was a really good one. I'm just wondering, I guess it's a small fish. I did see some photos of driveways, and in terms of the erosion and sediment, I know you're talking about the runoff, particularly around the hills and the valleys, but I did see some around the driveways, and I was wanting your feedback on the potential damages that CP and AP 2040 and 60 might do to our stormwater networks. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand your question.
So I saw material which looked like AP 60 that was on the driveway, but obviously it looked like it was rained and cleaned, and obviously there's some sediment under that. Does that contribute to, I guess, degrading our stormwater networks too?
Yes,
when we're on the flats?
Yes, definitely. It will sit in our stormwater sumps as well until such time we have a sucker truck come through and clean it out.
Okay. So not only is it with the hills, it's also with mainly the building industry around the use of AP60 and using them as driveways, right?
Yes, and actually using the right size stone as well.
Would I just like to, sorry, Tyler, I'll just throw in there that from my experience, most people use railway ballast, which is already washed before you get it, not AP65. So it's already got the fines out of it, but there is still a bit of stuff tracking on the road. So, okay.
Yeah. No, all good. Thanks.
Thank you, man. Yanni?
Yeah, thanks. Several questions. One was, I was particularly concerned with how both in Garland's Road with the scrap metal dealer is, but also the example that was given in the deputation where council has looked at a site and said, we don't have concerns, and then ECAN's come along and served an abatement notice for stormwater discharge. So I'm just trying to understand, like, how is it that two organisations can come up with two different views, and how do we actually work with ECAN to regulate what's happening at the moment? And I guess that's kind of related to the point 3, where a variation to seeking a variation around our comprehensive stormwater network discharge consent, so that maybe we just allow ECAN to take the lead, given the kind of, I guess, frustration that some people are having in the community, that they don't feel that for whatever reason that the stormwater is sufficient, and obviously are confused how council can say it's okay and ECAN can give an abatement notice.
Do I need to push that? Or is it okay?
No, that's green.
So just in terms of Emily Heights, there was a period where, it's my understanding, there was a period where that development was, it sort of fell into a window where regulations changed afterwards, and it complied at the time with what was required under City Council regulations, Environment Canterbury regulations. And so when officers went to inspect that from either council, there wasn't actually an issue of non-compliance. However, if you go to any area where there are steep cut batters, basically loose faces, they are at extreme risk of erosion, and those faces did erode. it's very, very difficult to stabilise a 80% or 70% loose slope. It's very difficult. And I guess ultimately, long term, we would be looking at, is a 70 or 80% slope a suitable finished product for lures to be left like? That may not be. There may need to be a change long term to how those things are, how those sort of sites are consented to avoid that sort of exposed soil. The abatement notice that was issued, we had to withdraw it because we identified in that process that there was an error in the notice. So that was withdrawn. Yeah.
Fundamentally, we have other examples where council looks at something and says, no concerns. He can look at something and go, actually, we're really concerned, and here's an abatement notice. And I mean, I presume it takes a lot for ECAN. I mean, from my experience, it takes a lot for ECAN to issue an abatement notice. It's not something that's done lightly.
Yeah, they're not confetti, but we have a slightly different perspective, given that we have slightly different regulations. We have our own original rules that will regulate sediment discharges and earthworks in a different manner.
Can I just ask, specifically in number 3?
Yep.
Is there anything that we can do around the Pawaho Heathcote, the industrial area? And I know there was a research report, a study done 2005 that investigated the stormwater network using the drainage maps, and the study found only one site in the catchment with any form of stormwater treatment. All other stormwater discharged untreated from hardstand areas and roofs into the reticulated network and then into the Heathcote River. Now, I know that was 2005, and I'm sure there's been some work done since, but I guess for just appreciate the concerns on the Port Hills. From my point of view, I'm also very concerned about what's happening in the Pawaho Heathcote and wondering what more can be done to get on top of particularly that industrial area that does have that risk of the stormwater. And just the final question, and then I'll be quiet, is the resources we've got to monitor compliance with consents in terms of building inspectors. As a council, do we need more resource so we can be more proactive and monitor? And if so, what would be the quantum of resource required to get on top of the problem?
Thanks, Yanni. I'll respond to the first one, and I'll perhaps defer the second question to Buster, perhaps. The first one is, with the industrial sites, you'll remember with the Stormwater and Land Drainage Bylaw that was passed and acted and is in action since July of last year, we have a comprehensive industrial auditing process alongside with the existing industrial work audits that we undertake, working with high-risk industrial sites to look at improving the quality of stormwater that comes from those sites. It's also working to ensure that businesses potentially cover up, they have covered areas for where they're undertaking industrial processes where there could be spills and the like that could end up in stormwater systems, and also retention kits, etc. So it's about working with business processes, improving those, but also looking at installing on-site stormwater filters and systems to cleanse the water before we actually have it discharged. If we, as a result of the audits and working with an industry, that we find that we are not comfortable with the level of contaminants that are in the stormwater going into our stormwater system, then we will elect to exclude them, and they will have to go to ECAM for a consent to discharge stormwater. And of course, I can assure you that process with ECAN is way more stringent than what we implement at this stage. Yes, so there's the whole industrial site audit program that's set out to be undertaken over the next several years to be able to clean up industry with respects to stormwater.
We work closely with Clive and Clive's colleagues on that.
Yeah. So you've got a second question. Is that okay on that one?
Yeah. Do you know what time frame by which we'd have all those sites audited?
How many last questions are you having there, Yanni?
Sorry, he just asked if there was any questions on that one. I mean, I'm happy just to get a memo on it. I know we've had
I've got the.
we've had some
So
report.
you had a second question about resourcing. So Buster, would you like to talk to that one?
Not really, but I feel I have to.
Yes, they cost.
In terms of the work Clive has referred to that the building inspectors are dealing with, these are sites that have building consent. So first, it's important to understand there's lots of construction activity that doesn't have a building consent that we won't be monitoring, so it isn't included in our program. A lot of building demolition, for example, doesn't require a consent, so the inspectors don't deal with that type of work. At the moment, the approach that we have taken in recent times to up our game around monitoring erosion and sediment control, firstly, we come up with a scheme to identify high-risk sites, and those sites are the only ones that get a site-specific sediment control inspection before any excavation work begins. The rest of the monitoring is done on the sites when it is combined with another type of inspection. So, for example, the foundation pre-pour inspection is when the non-high-risk sites will get their sediment and erosion control measures inspected. So in terms of resourcing, the program we put in place doesn't put a significant additional demand on the inspectorate because there's not a lot of additional inspections. It's incorporated with an inspection anyway. So we're checking that work when we go to site for something else. Does that make sense? It may well be if you need to up the ante and do more separate inspections, then the resource probably wouldn't be enough.
Okay, yeah, that good answer. Thanks, Buster. Sarah.
Yeah, so mine was along a similar line. So it sounds like the inspections that were done, the assessment of those 50 sites showed that people aren't sticking to what they should be doing, and so we do need to be more proactive in that space because, like you said, not everyone needs a resource consent to do this work. So are we able to get information, some advice for our annual plan considerations as to how we might increase the proactive inspections to make sure that people are meeting their sediment and erosion control requirements in building works? Like, can we do that? And would that need an additional resolution? So I could get some wording for that. That would be really good.
Is that your amendment that you're talking about?
A potential, like an additional, to get that information to us. Then look like.
So my understanding is if you want to put that forward as a resolution and have a seconder, we would then seek advice on that.
Okay. And the other one was, from your presentation, the things that you talked about at the beginning, upscaling the erosion control stuff that we've got going on the Port Hills at the moment, those kind of things. My recollection is that and the other things you talked about were all put up as staff proposals of things we could do in the last long-term plan. So it's clear that they're things that the organisation has assessed as being good for sediment and erosion control. It's just that a political decision was made when it came to balancing up stuff not to fund it as much as would have been required. Is that right? Okay, so so it looks like we know what to do. We're just in the space of choosing not to do it.
Oh, I feel whether you know what to do and you're working hard with each other.
No, but it's clear that because those things were put up and we said no to doing them.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Question.
Sorry, Sarah, did staff say yes to that?
Yeah. The microphone was just off at that point. Yeah. So.
Like I said, this is such a huge issue that it's more than what council can achieve on its own, meaning that with the Port Hills, we need multiple partners
Yeah,
dealing
agree.
with it
Agree, but
and
we know what.
contributing towards improving it,
Yeah,
not just us.
yeah. So there's been talk of a Port Hills management plan for quite some time, in a way of not just, and it hadn't been looking at. I hadn't heard it in an erosion and sediment control context. I'd heard about it more for that whole recreation and use of space kind of thing. But do you think it's something that would incorporate all of that into one space? Would be really useful.
Indeed, we look at it holistically,
Yeah.
from carbon sequestration to improving biodiversity, looking at the 6 values that we apply for waterways, which are heritage, you know,
All of
for
those things, yeah.
who don't know, it's heritage, cultural, it's landscape, it's ecology, it's drainage, and I can't remember the last one, recreation.
Recreation.
Yes,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's bringing all those together to really strengthen the environment up there to be resilient to climate change.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you'll be pleased to hear that a Port Hills management plan was in our draft community board plan. So that'll be good.
Pauline?
My question was around that plan too, Clive. Would you have resourcing in the Community Waterways Partnership to resource that, or do you need extra resourcing?
I think we need extra resourcing.
So it would be an annual plan.
Yeah.
Okay, so Melanie, are you going to put that in the recommendation? So is it recommend council considers or something stronger? And I think, would you put it in as part
Questions
of,
of these guys?
yeah. I mean, we do need to step on this with urgency, so probably as part of the annual plan would be desirable, would you think?
Yes.
So I'd put that in too.
Okay.
Thank you.
So just to clarify where we're at, as I understand it, there is a proposal to add number 4 to the list of recommendations, and that would need to be seconded, and we would need to seek advice from staff as to whether that is feasible.
So what one of the measures? I thought it's not reading, so I'll try and that as the team have flagged and also the head of the units flagged is that there are not sufficient resources necessarily to do that in the current capacity, so you would need to add.
We need to add,
resources
with
in the
resourcing
annual
being
plan.
considered as
Can
part
you
of the
just
annual
let me
plan.
finish?
Yeah.
And that ability to do that would actually be done at the end of the consultation period, where you've got sufficient advice and feedback in the consultation to do that. So there's nothing wrong with it as such, but it would need resourcing, and that decision
Okay,
would need
thank
to
you.
be made as part
So-
of the annual plan
Yep.
deliberations.
We're getting more questions than we're answering at the moment. Tim?
Thank you. If I understand it right, you're talking about resourcing, and if we put it back to ECAN, and because you've got more powers under the resource consent, but you're not geared up to do it. You haven't got the resources to do it. Is that correct?
So there are some aspects where a slight change would enable us to carry out significantly more enforcement work with the construction industry. We have a team who can carry out a certain volume of enforcement action,
Yep.
and a lot of that can be done quite quickly to address behaviour change. If we needed to, we could potentially, we could seek more resources to enable a stronger response. I would say at this stage we could make a significant difference with the staff we have already, with a targeted approach periodically through the year. For example, an autumn, we are probably going to be looking at an autumn construction campaign anyway to assist the City Council. We won't necessarily be taking enforcement action because that's not a power we have at present, but providing that backbone to help the City Council.
Yeah.
With additional powers, we would certainly support that in material terms. To make more of a difference, yes, we probably need to look at an increased team, but we have staff that can make a difference now.
Because I just noted number 3 when it says, note that if erosion and sediment control issues continue to be a problem, I mean, they've been a problem for a long time and it's a big problem.
Yes.
So that statement's kind of, it's past. So we know it's been a problem. It's been a big problem for a while. But it also says a variation may be sought to the council's comprehensive stormwater network discharge.
Yes.
So that would allow you to enact.
Yes.
So why don't we word it stronger and do it? Because I'm just thinking, you know, like this is an issue. It's been going on for a while, and there must be some sites that are doing their best to mitigate sediment or to do sediment control, and others that just kind of see it as, oh well, you know, just one of those doorstep things. Make it look.
I mean, I would just encourage the City Council to look at it very strongly, make that change if that's the direction it wants to go, and we can support that, the City Council.
Because where I'm just a wee bit confused, I'm not confused, but I want to step up and deal with this. And it'd be really good as, you know, when you go and inspect a building site, and if it's unsafe, we can close it. It'd be great to do that the same with sediment. But I'm just confused about resourcing. So is it, who is best to be resourced? Because if we resource and up resourcing, we're going to have to put that, it's going to be a cost to our ratepayers. But what about the ECAN side of it? So I'm just wondering how to...
So can I add to that? Is that if we have a clause where we can choose to exclude building sites where they've continuously been inspected and flouting erosion sediment control measures, and there's sediment coming off, and we've got an issue with them, then we could notify them and say that you're now excluded out of our consent, and that you will have to go and get a construction phase discharge consent with ECAN. Now, I don't know, I suspect there are other people in this room who'd be able to talk with the implications of that, because that's an added layer to our, you know, for our building inspectors.
So I'm just going to interrupt here. I think we're moving into a situation where we're trying to solve a range of issues that have been legitimately brought up, but we would need to seek advice on these. So my suggestion would be that we go back to the recommendations, that if there's an additional recommendation to report back on alternative or additional options, that we add that and come back with that advice, rather than trying to solve it on the hoof. Everyone is, I think, in agreement. There is an issue, that we are committed to addressing it, that the staff have put forward a number of options to address the issue, and that there are other good ideas that need to be considered and costed.
Could I suggest that it stays on the lies on the table until we get that information back? Because it just, I don't want to. I mean,
I agree with Tim. Like, it's quite complicated.
We want to deal with
presentations.
What do you suggest, Lynn? Vote for what's here. No?
So the proposal at the moment is that it lies on the table, that staff go and make further assessment of the implications and report back to council, and we can do that within a reasonable time frame. So are you thinking next council meeting, Mary?
I'd be happy with two. I mean,
The
it's a serious issue. It's been going on for too long. I would prefer to do this once and do it properly than to have to visit twice.
Do we have to vote on 4 as an amendment or not?
No, we don't have to do anything. The proposal is that we let it lie on the table, that we seek advice against the additional proposals that have come through, and that we report back at the next practicable council meeting.
We'll do that. Everyone happy? You don't want it to lay on the table? All right. Who's going to move this here? Melanie, you're moving it. Who's seconding? You're seconding it. Right.
There's a fifth recommendation.
Okay,
So we now have an
mover and-
additional recommendation.
yes, right, yep.
So
Where is it?
let's have a look at what that recommendation is. Then my suggestion is that we pause for 5 minutes to enable staff to provide advice and for councillors to consider what those fourth and fifth recommendations are.
So we're now putting 2 more amendments up, are we? Not 1, is that right?
2 more recommendations.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we sit still for 5 minutes just to catch up, get our breath.
So can we just confirm that the fourth and fifth recommendations have been accurately captured?
And they will need a mover in a second.
Yes, they will.
That's correct, because currently you are consulting on your annual plan and that information is already out there in the public and that consultation is not yet concluded.
Let's get them clear first.
So we're voting on these.
Yes.
So 4 and 5 together?
So the proposal is to combine 4 and 5?
So you've taken out the bit that says.
Why do you actually wait till this late to put it up? That's the bit I can't understand.
That was based on the information reviewed directly.
Drivel.
Okay, so have we got to a final wording on 4 and 5?
So you weren't with the, so number 5 has the correct wording at the beginning that Helen's put together.
Yes.
Because of the annual plan consultation.
Yes.
So staff to advise after the conclusion of the annual plan, whether there are grounds to A, consider a change to the, and B, consider working with partners to develop a Port Hills management plan.
Stop playing with it and tell us what you want.
Okay, so at the end of grounds, number 5, put comma A, and then what comes after it, and then make 4B.
I'm going to suggest that we pause for 5 minutes, we get the wording right, we come back and assess whether we've got a mover
We're
and a
pausing.
seconder.
Okay.
Why not just lie it on the table and bring it back to the next meeting and give a
No,
chance
we're
to get it all
pausing.
worked through?
Everyone wants to carry on and get it done, so we're pausing.